So here we go with Hereditary, and the official logline of this screenplay is: when the matriarch of the Graham family passes away, her daughter and grandchildren begin to unravel cryptic and increasingly terrifying secrets about the ancestry, trying to outrun the sinister fate they seem to have inherited. Okay, I always like to try a logline, so here's mine. When a grandmother dies, her family begins to spiral, discovering that the horrors they face are not just inherited. Screenplay statistics: it is 118 pages, 156 scenes. Runtime of the film theatrically, 2 hours and 7 minutes. That's 1 minute and 4 seconds per page and 1.3 scenes per page. And the often overlooked part of creating a screenplay is the title of the film. Always significant to try to come up with a title that has multiple meanings and sort of ties in the themes of your screenplay. And so we try to break them down here and see what we can figure out. I found 3 meanings to the title of this screenplay / movie, Hereditary. First is the inherited trauma of mental illness. The most immediate here, the psychological, emotional trauma passed down through generations. Annie talks about her family history of mental illness, her father's starving himself, her brother's suicide, her mother's manipulation. And the second meaning for the title is the supernatural inheritance, talking about the destiny of the occult, talking about King Payman, who is intended for this body, this vessel that's being prepared for him. And the third meaning would be the inheritance of our fate, the title hinting at illusions that we have some sort of power over our own destiny. Now we're getting into some deep philosophy here. And it alludes to the idea that her and her family are puppets in this already predestined fate. It is a fascinating thought exercise, dabbling into these ideas of nihilism. I wrote a whole screenplay about it. But it can be dangerous if you go too far down that rabbit hole and you start to come up with these ideas of, if nothing matters, if everything's predetermined, then who cares? What's the point? And now to formatting, mechanics, and style. And this is where the screenwriter teaches us how to read their individual screenplay with their own signature styles. The first thing to look at here is character tags and how he changes the name of the character in the dialogue based on the information that we have about that character. This is something you see a lot in literature, where they hold back information and we discover it along with the characters. In screenwriting, for the most part, anytime someone shows up for the first time, we find out who they are exactly, maybe a little bit about them, and then that's their name throughout the screenplay. Mostly just so there's no confusion for the actors. But I like what he does here. In fact, I do this myself sometimes, where, especially if you don't have to go too long, if you can do it in the same scene, you can make it a little more interesting by giving us some information. And then all of a sudden, now we know the person by a different name, and we're going to use that name. Okay, here's what I'm talking about. Let's look at it, page 43. He's talking about a woman here. He's calling her older woman. An older woman is having a conversation with Annie, and you can see the character designations here: older woman, Annie, older woman, Annie. And then the question is asked, who are you? Or she finally introduces herself, and she says, I'm Joan. Annie says hi, and then here she goes. Instead of older woman, she is now Joan. Annie Joan, Annie Joan. Another thing to look at is how he does sound design in the screenplay. Obviously, he has the all caps sound a few times, but he also describes it sort of in a literary way and puts it in parentheses. We can see an example of that here on page 81, where it says in parentheses, there is the faint sound of Max's barking, that's the dog, as if heard from a great distance. So rather than just having bark, bark, and then trying to designate that it's getting quieter, he puts it in here in parentheses and gives us the whole enchilada. Ari Aster uses many slugs in his screenplays, but only to designate time. So he doesn't do what you can do with mini slugs, is once you've established a location and you move around in that location, you don't say that it's still interior, or you don't say that it's still night. You just go from bedroom to bathroom to kitchen. He doesn't do that. He still establishes the scene with the more traditional slug heading, but if there's a time shift, he will show it. Here is an example on page 20 where it says interior Catholic school gymnasium night, then 30 minutes later, then 5 minutes later. He does this quite a bit, and if you've seen the film recently, you may remember that there are a lot of transitions in the film that depict time. They'll show The character doesn't move. It's sort of a faux time lapse where it's day to night or night to day. The lighting changes, but it's obvious it's not a sped up camera or anything like that. But he also uses later, moments later, even seconds later. We see that in the screenplay. Time to talk about white space, and he has some long, thick action lines. There are 39 paragraphs that are 7 or 8 lines each. 8 is his max, but there are quite a few of them in the screenplay. At the same time, there are a lot of one-line paragraphs, and that is because Ari Aster, in his screenplays, he uses the paragraph as a beat, as a shot sequence. So it takes as long as it takes. If it takes 8 lines to describe what we're going to see in the scene, or especially if multiple things are going on, it's going to be a longer paragraph. If it's so-and-so got up and crossed the room, it's going to be 1 line. So let's look at it. A good example of that is to compare page 114 to page 35, and you can see exactly what I'm talking about. On 114, we have these really thick paragraphs, but it's a lot of describing and explaining and setting things up and showing us what's going on, as opposed to page 35, where Peter is in the car and he's driving his sister, and you know what happens here. It's a pretty heady experience. But things are happening fast, so there's a lot. This happens, then this happens. So the paragraphs get smaller, smaller, smaller. And you can see how it plays out on the page here, where you have a lot of white space. It's easy to read. Your eyes go vertically down the page instead of horizontally across. So you could even take those longer paragraphs and break them up, but he's being very consistent about using the paragraph to describe a beat. And so it is what it is. It goes where it goes. And now we look at direction on the page, where we look at the screenwriters and how they choose to use or not use direction on the page. Last week we did challengers, and there was very little direction on the page. It was very cinematic writing where you could just visualize the shots with your mind. Ari Aster is more putting on his director's cap here, telling us what the shot's going to look like, what we're going to see in the shot, framing it up, even some of the editing. 56 times in the screenplay, we get a we are, we see, we follow. Probably more than that. I think I might have missed some, but it's quite a bit. You can see here on page 9091, through the foyer window, we see Steve and Dr. Stetson outside. Then on top of 91, we see Dr. Stetson saying, "I'm sorry, I can't." But there are a lot of filming instructions. There's pans and drifts and moves and tracks and pushes and wides and booms, low angle, high angle, extreme high angle, and then ECU in abbreviations, which is extreme close-up. Page 37 gives us a really good example of both the we sees and also the camera direction. So let's look at this quick scene here on the page. Exterior cemetery day, an overcast day, a sad gathering of mourners. Annie, Peter, and Steve stand lost among them. Okay, pretty standard there. Then it says, we are at a distance. The coffin in profile is being lowered into the ground. We are booming down to follow the sinking casket, keeping it centered. So talking about where it needs to be on the screen. And as the coffin descends into the earth, we do too, or so do we, it says. We slowly creep down, losing sight of the cemetery and the mourners. We continue tracking down along the dirt and the earthworms and the weeds. I love this. Sinking deeper and deeper into the dark, wet soil. Soon we are swallowed up again in black. So he doesn't do it like he's writing some menu or some blueprint. He still makes it sound beautiful and cinematic, keeps you in the story. But it is very to the point of, this is how I see it in my head. I want you to see it that way too. So much so, I'm just going to draw it out for you right here. Another quick example here is on page 84, where we see at the end of one scene, and it says the composition of this shot, wide and high angle, is matched eerily to the cut to interior classroom next day. So this is also something to talk about. He does this a couple of times where he ties into the next scene header with the end of the previous action line. This is a voice and a style, and some screenwriters use this technique to tie continuity of scenes. Usually, though, it's a transition, like from one room to the next, or if someone's running and going from one space to the other. Here, if you'll look closely, you'll see that the bedroom and then the classroom, it says next day. So they're tying in a new scene, but it's more like a match cut. But rather than just say match cut, he's wanting to be more specific. And now to the actual writing of the screenplay, and there is some very good writing in here. You can see why A24 was like, yeah, okay, this guy is very talented. He has all these shorts that have gotten a lot of buzz, and this screenplay is excellent. So let's give it a roll. Let's see how it goes. Ari Aster uses a lot of side comments and quotes in his action lines to clarify the thoughts. If you follow what I just said there, you'll know exactly what I'm talking about. He'll clarify a look or a movement, and he wants to make sure there's no confusion about what's going on the page. Here's some examples of what I'm talking about. Page 13, they're in the classroom, and the classroom erupts with excitement. And then we have in the action line a quote, "Oh my God, did you see that?" These are not things that the students say. I mean, maybe they do say that as sort of extra noise in the background, but it's more to show us this is how the people are reacting. On page 10, we have a conversation between Annie and Charlie, and without looking at Annie, Charlie shrugs, attempts, "I don't know." So Ari Aster wants to make sure that we know what that shrug meant. So he puts it right there in quotes. On page 17, Annie is talking to Peter and Charlie, and she's wanting to know if any of them went into her mother's room. She asks, "Did either of you go into grandma's room recently?" And then the action line is, they both squint. "Why would we go in there?" In quotation marks. So he's making it very clear what that squint means. I counted over 90 times in the screenplay where he uses this technique to clarify what's going on in the action line. And if you go to Screenplay Reddit, they'll have a lot of opinions about this. And he has a thumbprint. All screenwriters do that thing that if you read them enough, you'll notice, oh, I know who wrote this. This is how they write. His is exclamation marks. They are abundant. If I was going to say someone had a lot of exclamation marks or exclamation points, is it marks or points? I don't remember. Exclamations in their screenplay. What would you say would be a lot? 10, 20, 50? How about 265 exclamations in this screenplay? Here on 48, we can see 7. Here's a page I just randomly picked. Page 56, there are 8 exclamations. I got really self-conscious there about exclamation point versus exclamation mark. I'll go with exclamation mark. Ari Aster is very minimalistic when it comes to his character introductions. We'll go back here to page 1, which, look at that. Page 1's got a lot of blocky text on it. But here he introduces Peter, and his description is handsome, skinny boy. And when he introduces the father, Steve, his characteristics that he uses to introduce him are tall, broad-shouldered, formal. So not a lot to it, not big, flowy, beautiful descriptions of who they are as a person and what they mean to you. So he doesn't dig into the psyche of the character when describing them, just very simply, this is what they look like, this is what they're wearing, let's cast it.